Now with me now is former Assistant U.S. Attorney and Fox News contributor Andy McCarthy. So, Andy, before we get into the details, Nathan Wade resigned, but Fani Willis is still there to prosecute. What does this do to the timeline of the case now, if anything?
Well, it's hard to say, Edward, because they don't have a trial date at the moment as it is. And the other thing that's kind of hanging out there that has to be dealt with is the fact that 2 days earlier, Judge McAfee threw out 6 of the 41 counts in the indictment, but invited the prosecutors to go back to the grand jury and supersede or refile. If they do, those counts are important to them. They don't want to lose them. But at the same time, if they do that, that opens up various avenues for delay.
Yeah. And so now I want to ask you about the judge's decision. Now, both the judge and the district attorney are up for re-election this year. Now, first, that fact alone, does a re-election for a judge in a high-profile case in the same year cause any pause for you?
Well, I'm having a lot of trouble as we look around the country with all of these electoral state systems. In the federal system, we appoint judges. So at least in theory, they have to go through the Senate. Same thing with prosecutors, by the way, chief prosecutors of districts. They have to go through the Senate and assure them that they're not going to use their powers politically. In the state system, the judges in many of them and the prosecutors are elected. And I think very often they serve the politics rather than the law. I don't think that used to be a problem when I was a young prosecutor in New York. But the culture has changed. So it's not seen as disqualifying in a lot of places when you're a prosecutor and you say to the electorate, if you elect me, I'll use my powers to go after this political enemy of ours, like Letitia James did in New York. And the judges are kind of expected to be political in these systems.
Yeah. So in the judge's decision, he said he found an appearance of impropriety, but that the defense did not prove their case, that there was a conflict of interest. What's the difference in those two things?
Yeah, there was a conflict of interest. The difference is, and I think you put your finger on it when you said political, the difference is this is a judge who's running for re-election in the same district that Fani Willis is in. These are low turnout elections. She's got a political base there. He had to confront the fact that if he booted her, that would redound to his detriment politically. And the broader picture is, if he had disqualified her because she gave false testimony in a proceeding, that wouldn't just put taint on this case. It would be like every single case that the Fulton County District Attorney brings. So I don't think he wanted to go there, and he pulled up short.
Yeah, and we saw a very angry, see some of the testimony on the other side of the screen there. We saw a very angry District Attorney Willis in this hearing. Now, given the testimony that we saw from her, how will that play in the case against the former president with that judge and her prosecuting? Yeah,
I think the decision not to remove her while legally wrong is really a coup for Trump, because it opens up the possibility of an appeal of this, which is delay. And that's what his main strategy here is delay. But also, number one, her presence in the case infects it with, he called it the odor of mendacity. That's not good when the judge is saying that about you as the prosecutor. But the other thing is, this whole episode, one of the things I've been trying to argue from the beginning is that RICO is a very complicated statute. She's filed a sprawling indictment, and I don't think she's up to this case. And the best indication of that is they've taken 4 pleas so far. Nobody has pled guilty to RICO, and nobody has even pled guilty to a crime serious enough to go to prison for 1 hour, despite all the histrionics about how our democracy was hanging by a thread.
So you think part of the case is relying on that politics, a favorable judge in a favorable district to go forward with a favorable jury?
No, I think that's absolutely right. But also, she's still got to get her hands around this case, and I don't think she's ever had a RICO case. And she keeps saying these people conspired to overturn an election result. And the problem with that is overturning an election result is not a crime. To conspire to do something, you have to conspire to do something that's actually a crime. So what you have here is a bunch of people, 19 of them, who don't see themselves as an organization. They're not a RICO. The only thing they've ever done together is get indicted. And they have like disparate little crimes that they've possibly committed in the course of doing something that was legal, which is to avail themselves of the legal means to try to overturn an election result.
Yeah, and what do you think about this in terms of they have a state investigation going on into her, and what if she gets subpoenaed to go in front of Congress?
Well, if past is prologue, she'll do what Alan Bragg did in New York and pretty much ignore the House Judiciary Committee. For her, I think the state legislature is probably a bigger deal because she's a state official and they have real teeth in terms of what they can do to her.
Yeah, I want to switch gears quickly here. We don't have a lot of time left, but the President Biden faces some troubles from the former special counsel Robert Hur. He testified this week. He defended his assessment of President Biden's memory as well as his decision not to bring the charges in the classified document case. Do you think that was fair?
Well, I think what he said was absolutely fair. Remember, what the regulation requires is that he file a confidential report with the Attorney General explaining his charging decision. And here where you have a case where the guy did everything he needed to do, all the actions you need to do to illegally retain documents, and the prosecutor found over the weight of the evidence that he acted willfully, that's a hard row to hoe to explain to your boss if the Biden Justice Department actually wanted to prosecute and was open to prosecuting. To explain why you don't bring charges in that situation is very tough, and that's what he tried to do.
Yeah, in the last 15 seconds, I want to get one quick follow on that. Do you think the actual tapes of the president need to be released, not just the transcript?
I would like to see them release everything, and I think my standard is, what if it was a Republican? If it was a Republican, we'd already have it.
Yeah, Andy McCarthy, thank you for your insight on this. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.